talking about a clit talk, clit talk, clit talk, talking about a clit talk, clit talk, clit talk.
Cliterati, we have a very exciting guest back in the studio today. She is the interviewer for the series Men Who Take Baths, where men in bubble baths are interviewed about what it means to be a man. So the project advocates for gender equity through an interview series, art shows, public discussions on Clubhouse, and men's groups. So, and I love this. Their three essential components are connection through conversation, redefining the markers of masculinity, and Men Who Take Baths is a tool for empathy. So we're going to dive into that. Please welcome back to the studio, Nicolle Hodges.
Oh,
Hello, good to be back.
we had so much fun with you in the last episode. We've all decided that we want to be your friend.
Okay.
Yeah, it's official.
If you didn't listen to her last episode, it was one of the best episodes I've ever done. And she really had a good laugh because she said they do butt plug brunches, and I was like, what do you do, like talk about butt plugs? And she's like, Lindsay, you put it in your butt and you go to brunch.
And you go to brunch.
I'm like, now I feel like I have to do that. So we're gonna just dive right into this incredible movement that you have created. What inspired you to tackle transforming the culture of masculinity from the bath in your interview series, Men Who Take Baths? Like, how did this idea come to you?
I love absurdity. And so that for sure is that's a starting point.
Yep.
I like to say that Men Who Take Baths landed in my brain with such certainty that it felt more like a memory of something I had already done and less of an idea of something that I had yet to do.
Ooh.
And Men Who Take Baths, if I try to think of like what was the thing that put it in my brain, I don't know for sure. I just know the moment that it ended up there. And I was in a plane and I was at that perfect altitude where like your problems are kind of behind you. And then that feeling of newness, an adventure of you're going to a new place starts to creep in. And I was looking down at all the rows of houses and I could see all the cars zipping around. And I just thought to myself, like, wow, there are so many lives that I'll never know. And I learned later that there's a word for that, and the word is sonder. And it flashed me back, all things are connected. It flashed me back to this poem that I heard when I was like, I don't know, 14 or 15, which again, like put into context this idea of stories. And it was, the man walked by me on a dark street for a moment illuminated by the lamp and then disappeared again, carrying with him all the stories of his life. And I just thought, okay, storytelling is how we create empathy. It is the ability to see a piece of yourself in another and love them as you wish to be loved. And so I just turned to my seatmate, who was my friend, not a stranger, and I was like, I'm going to put men in bathtubs and interview them about masculinity. She was like, okay. And that's all it was. It was just this moment of kind of seizing that, holy shit, this is so strange that it might work kind of feeling. And it was all set up. It was ready to go. I reached out to men in my life who were kind of like, first degree friends. They were pretty close already in my circle. I felt like they kind of were exemplary of like noble masculine behavior, as in they were like good leaders and they were respectful of women and they were good partners and all these things.
Yeah.
And I asked them to participate. And a couple of days before we were set to film, Me Too happened. And the article in the New Yorker about the revelation of Harvey Weinstein and like the absolute epidemic of sexual assault that was rampant throughout Hollywood and like the whole fucking world became apparent. And I was like, oh, this is why I had to have this in place, because this is an opportunity to document the evolution of masculine psychology and male identity in a post-Me Too world, because shit is about to never be the same.
Damn.
Whoa. There's something on your website, like we love Greek mythology here and really taking it back to the
now we can definitely
origin
be friends.
roots. Well, in Pussy or Reclamation, we do have a whole episode on this, and we talk about it all the time. Is the pussy flashing mythological story about how it healed the planet,
Yeah.
you know? And I was reading on your website how Odysseus, a male warrior in need of healing, was restored to health when goddess Circe, the feminine archetype, bathes him. And like when you go into a bath, you descend into the darkness, into the dark world of the unconscious. And bathing is a symbolic transformation when we accept all parts of ourselves. So like this is on your website. And I just thought it was so poignant because what you're really doing is initiating these men into an embodied awareness of their feminine psyche through their sensuality.
Yes. I was speaking on a panel, I think it was, on Clubhouse, you know, back when Clubhouse kind of was really big.
Yeah.
For like a second.
And I, some good relationships did come out of my time on Clubhouse for sure. And one of them was, someone heard me speak about men who take baths, and he was a psychotherapist who specialized in helping veterans with PTSD, and he used a lot of like Jungian psychology and mythology to kind of like redefine or help them find who they are based on like certain archetypes throughout history. And archetypes are just fantastic. I mean, like Joseph Campbell talks about this all the time, right? Is that like, there's a reason why we resonate so strongly with archetypes. They're almost kind of like the amalgamation of the collective consciousness, which is then told to us in storytelling form. And like, we can all relate to it and identify it in a certain way. He contacted me and he said, I really love what you're doing. Do you realize that you're following a myth? And I was like, I do not realize this. And we got on a phone call together and for about an hour and a half, and he told me about the myth of Odysseus. And I really had no idea that this is what I was doing. Like I was doing it based again on just like intuition and inner guidance. And it was an interaction like that where I'm always looking for little moments. I call them kind of like permission from the universe, then I'm allowed to continue the work. Because if I'm not operating from a place of integrity, synchronicities don't really seem to happen to me as much. Those like signs that, you know, I'm on the right track, I feel kind of off kilter. And there's certain things, and this person coming in and being like, this is an ancient myth and what you're doing is following this. It was permission to continue and to continue bathing men in this way, and that you are doing it from the right place, and this is contributing to healing and collective healing, essentially. So yeah, like what you said, it's Circe is the embodiment of the feminine archetype, and healing is wholeness, which is gained through the immersion into the subconscious. And it had to be a warrior. It had to be, you know, the ultimate idea of what it meant to be a man, which was like so attached to like violence and stoicism and a conqueror's mentality. In the myth, Circe, this is a funny side note, Circe actually, she's known for like turning people into animals. And so when Odysseus and his men return from the Trojan War, they get stuck on her island. She turns all his men into swine. She turns them all into pigs, which I like because, one of my submissives is actually a pig. He dresses as a pig. So I was like, oh my God, I'm Circe.
You are.
You are.
So,
which is ironic,
totally are.
because the Circe in Game of Thrones is very different from that. So you are a journalist and a researcher. So from your research, how would you define toxic masculinity, and how is that currently affecting men and women today?
So when I think of toxic masculinity, I think of like hegemonic masculinity, which was this perception of power. And I think a lot of masculinity, a lot of what we're doing right now with gender equity or gender harmony, as you guys have put it, is like this redefining our relationship with power. And that's what it has to be, because hegemonic masculinity or toxic masculinity is this idea that in order for one to be perceived as most powerful, it requires the subordination of another. And that is, I think, what we're really trying to redefine when we talk about toxic masculinity. Not to say that all masculinity is toxic, because masculinity is often in response to what the culture needs. So when we talk about patriarchy was important at a time because of what was attempted to be accomplished. And a lot of the values at certain times were going out and getting land, or going out and murdering others to acquire women or children or slaves or goods or whatever it is. And so at the time and throughout history, we have had these versions of masculinity, which, for better or worse, were what was required. We don't need that anymore. So what is left in its place? This weird, almost like fragmented idea of, okay, if masculinity is purpose driven, then what is the purpose of man? What are we asking men to be now? And how do we help them change their relationship to power, where we're not saying you have to give up power in order for others to be equal? Rather, by you allowing yourself to reconnect with feminine aspects of yourself and become whole, you will only become more powerful. Simone de Beauvoir, who's a French feminist philosopher who I love, wrote the book The Second Sex. And one thing that really stood out to me was when she said trans people are angels. And what she meant by that is trans people will help us begin to eliminate the idea of gender. But to keep it on the track of like masculinity in particular, and like how that fits into this paradigm shift that we're trying to create, there has to be an understanding that men have inherently been told their entire lives and historically that feminine aspects of themselves make them weak. Therefore, when we're trying to have a discussion with men around, women's rights and women's equality, we have to also decondition them from believing that anything feminine is weak, if we want them to find it within themselves and find strength and power in that. There's this idea of like, what is man if simply not a woman? And what is a woman if simply not a man? And if we continue to have this dialogue of like, these things are separate, it's going to be difficult for men to not feel like they're being asked to give up a core tenet of what makes them who they are.
Yeah. Well said. When you've talked to men about getting in touch with their feminine energy inside of these interviews, what did they say?
Men, okay, how do I put this? Men want
I'm talking about a clit talk, clit talk, clit talk. Talking about a clit talk, clit talk, clit talk. Come on, girls and boys and everyone on the gender rainbow. Bring your pussies to the show.